Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar, The Raw Food Immunity Connection Part 2. We're super excited to share with you today valuable but often overlooked information on important nutrients for immune function, food sources of them, seldom discussed dietary considerations for creating health from the inside out, and much more. We want you to reach your health goals and are happy to provide you with information that can help you reach them while avoiding dietary pitfalls. This webinar is the second in our 2020 summer webinar series, Transcending What's Trending. We've found in our collective 60 plus years of personal experience, as well as our research, education, course development, and clinical experience working with patients, that it's so easy to be pulled in different directions depending on the prevailing trends in the health world, and that education is the greatest predictor of success on a raw food and plant-based diet. For those of you who don't know us yet, I'm Dr. Rick Dina, and you'll be hearing from Dr. Karen Dina in the second section of this webinar. We're both chiropractic physicians with a strong interest in plant-based and raw food nutrition, and we're board certified and licensed in the state of California. We're the developers of the Science of Raw Food Nutrition series of classes we taught for 10 years in person. We're also the developers and instructors of the updated and expanded Mastering Raw Food Nutrition online and interactive course, which we'll share more about at the end of this webinar. From this and from speaking at many conferences and events over the years, we've become known for our thoroughness and scientific accuracy, our ability to make complex subjects easy to understand, and our encouraging approach that takes unnecessary hurdles out of the way. Now, once we began teaching our curriculum online in 2016, that inspired us to reach out online in other ways also. For the past 5 years in a row, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, we have hosted raw food plant-based summits where we interviewed successful, healthy, long-term raw vegans and plant-based doctors to share with you how you can be successful on this path over the long term as well. And down there in the bottom right, we are also the authors of the Raw Food Nutrition Handbook. Before we continue, we'd like to let you know that the information and opinions expressed by us in this webinar are not intended to be used as medical advice and should not be used to diagnose or treat any medical condition or as a substitute for individual health care. The webinar is presented with the understanding that we are not liable for misconception, misuse, or adverse effects resulting from its use. Any type of dietary change, nutritional therapy, or fasting should always be undertaken with the supervision of a qualified healthcare practitioner. We may end up being those healthcare providers for you, but watching this webinar alone does not establish a doctor-patient relationship. Having said that, as some of you know who have seen our webinars in the past, in a typical webinar, we start with some background information about Dr. Karen and I. Then we share some sample teaching content, which this year is on the immune function, but in past webinars, we've also talked about a wide variety of other topics: ketogenic diets, intermittent fasting, information about sources of nutrients such as B12, iron, zinc, calcium, omega-3s, etc. We've discussed microbiome health, triglyceride levels and lipid profiles in high fruit eaters, calorie density, etc. Then third, we talk about our curriculum content and the details of how we deliver it. And if you're here on a live webinar, we've got some questions and answers at the end. If you're watching the webinar replay or recording, then we don't have that particular part. Now this year, in the interest of time, and due to the extensive nature of how a variety of nutrients are involved in immune system function, combined with Dr. Karen's enthusiasm for this subject material, we're actually going to skip our backgrounds for webinars 2 and 3. you can always go back and watch webinar 1 from June of 2020. And in all the previous years, we also discuss our background. So you want to learn more about us and who you're hearing from, please feel free to go check those out at rawfoodeducation.com on the Mastering Raw Food Nutrition page. In this webinar, I'm going to give a summary of what I discussed in the previous webinar. And if what you hear interests you and you haven't had the chance to see our previous webinar, we would encourage you to go and watch the recording starting at 17 minutes and 45 seconds in. Again, this will just be a summary, although I am going to add one thing compared to last time, a little bit of a discussion about if we can really boost our immune system or not, or if that's really the best way to think about things. Then Dr. Karen will discuss vitamin D and zinc as they relate to the immune system. And then, of course, information about the class and live questions and answers if you're watching this webinar live. In the last webinar, the content Dr. Karen talked about vitamin C, iron, and selenium. In this webinar, she'll discuss vitamin D and zinc. And in our next webinar for August, she's going to discuss vitamin B12. I'll have a little section on vitamin B12 testing borrowed from a 2019 webinar, as well as looking at some other nutrients that are related to immune function. All right, so having said all that, now we can get on to my summary of immune system considerations. I mentioned in the last webinar that over the past 23 years in clinical practice, I have individually analyzed lab results of several hundred omnivores and several hundred plant-only eaters. One of the key differences between these two groups in lab testing results is that the plant eaters have lower white blood cell counts. This indicates less stress on the immune system and the body in general, and that is good. This was me. We took a look and said I was at 4.3, which is near the lower end of the reference range. And there's some other numbers that we saw last time. So the typical reference range we just saw goes from about 3.5 to almost 11. 7.1 is the center. Now, this isn't published in any textbooks, but based on my clinical experience working with people who eat fruits and vegetables as the foundation of their diet and are eating exclusively plant foods, the range I see is about 3 to 7, 5 being on average. And like we said last time, the shift to the left, meaning that we're not producing as many white blood cells, means there's less stress on the body. There's fewer toxins coming in, so the body doesn't have to make as many white blood cells, and therefore it saves itself the effort and the toxicity, and that is great. Now what that does is it leaves extra capacity for the immune system. So here's a pie chart of our immune system capability, and our immune system always has to monitor and respond to various foreign invaders coming into the body to deal with them. And there's a variety of things that the body has to respond to. Here are just a few over on the right. Now, when we start doing these things in excess, putting more stress on the body, we see that we have increased our tasks of the immune system, therefore decreasing its capacity because it has more to do now. So our body has to work harder, and we tend to see an increase in white blood cells, an increase in temperature, and there's other indicators you can see on lab work about stress on the body. What's interesting is these same type of behaviors over here on the right in red also tend to lead to things like obesity, high blood pressure, and type 2 diabetes, for example, which are risk factors for being susceptible to things like COVID-19. So we have a negative synergy going on there that you could probably do without. So when we stop doing as many of those things, we can recapture some of that immune system capacity because we're not taxing the system as much. And like we said last time, if we really start to clean up our act, so I've crossed out a lot of these things, then we can recapture even more immune system capacity. Now, this whole idea of if we can boost the immune system, some people refer to this as a boost. And here is our look at that. Our position is that when we simultaneously avoid toxic substances found in processed foods, that are concentrated in animal foods, found in recreational drugs, etc., and at the same time provide the body, including the immune system, with the nutrients that it needs, then we have a double whammy of positive synergy to maximize our immune capability and keep us the most protected from foreign invaders. Now, that's a lot different than thinking we can just simply boost the immune system with nutrients. Now, when we get into this boosting mentality, there's a few concerns that come up. Number one, we can get sort of a false sense of security. We continue with our unhealthy habits, and then we figure we can just give ourselves a boost by taking nutrients to compensate, so we're still overtaxing our system. We're still filling these in orange because we haven't really stopped putting stress on the system. And that's at least half the battle, and that goes ignored when you figure you can just boost yourself up taking a bunch of nutrients. And the other sort of semi-related part of that is we get into this remedy mentality where we treat nutrients like drugs, thinking that they are the primary solution to our health concerns. And we figure also if a certain level of a particular nutrient or combination of nutrients can have a positive impact, if those things are good, then more must be better. And that can be very dangerous. So in the last webinar, Dr. Karen talked about iron and immune function, where we need enough, but excessive levels can actually inhibit our immune function. She talked about how the body can compensate for that. So, for example, taking iron is going to be worse, not better, for your immune system and many other parts of the body. Although not directly related to immune function, with this same type of thinking, I think about DHA, the long-chain omega-3 fat that's very, very beneficial for your brain and for various hormones in the body. A lot of people don't have enough of that, so they get some, that's good, but is more better? Actually not. More excessive levels of that can thin your blood so much that you hemorrhage. You can get a hemorrhagic stroke because the blood on the way up to your brain leaks out of the blood vessels and doesn't make it to your brain. That's not good. That's actually really bad. With vitamin D, Dr. Karen's going to speak about that in a few minutes in this webinar, and she's going to talk about how vitamin D helps to regulate the immune system so it doesn't overreact. That's really important. But excessive levels of vitamin D are actually toxic to the body. So for example, when we go out in the sun, our body will only allow a certain amount of vitamin D to be produced. You stay out in the sun twice as long, you won't make twice as much vitamin D. Your body cuts it off at a certain level. But if you overdose on supplements, you don't get that protection mechanism of the body not making excessive amounts, and you can go overboard with supplements and actually get toxic. So more can be worse, and whole foods help keep us in balance, whereas where we can just boost things up with supplements, we run into that issue. So whole natural plant foods such as fruits and vegetables and a few nuts and seeds here and there are super nutrient dense, giving the immune system what it needs nutrient-wise in a balanced, synergistic manner, while simultaneously not containing substances or ingredients that put stress on our systems. In our opinion, that is the way to maximize our immune system capacity and provide the most protection. So we're allowing the immune system and the body to function optimally, and the body gets the credit rather than thinking we can force it to perform the way we want with external supplements. And that's very much a holistic model versus a partialistic, more medical remedy mentality model that most people are in to their detriment. Now, like the extended version of this discussion in the June 2020 webinar, to end on this slide, we will show that a typical immune system capacity is shown here in gray. Okay, this is when people are overtaxing their system, they're not providing the nutrients that they need, and they have a certain capacity. We can compare that to the much greater blue immune system capacity when we achieve the high nutrient, low toxin synergy of healthy, whole food, plant-based eating, especially when that's centered around fresh fruits and vegetables. And we can see here what a dramatic difference there is. So if COVID-19 or a future worse virus enters your system, or just for general health and optimal well-being, which immune system chunk of the pie would you like to have? And when we also consider that the same practices that allow our immune systems to function at peak capacity also allow us to avoid heart disease, strokes, angina, TIAs, dementia, diabetes, hypertension, autoimmune disease, aches, pains, premature aging, the side effects of the pharmaceutical medications that people take as a result of not doing the right things, as well as brain fog, being overweight, sluggishness, etc. And instead, these things help to optimize your weight, your energy, your blood pressure, your blood sugar, your mental clarity, your athletic endeavors, your energy, and your overall well-being. Then the great news is you have a huge amount of control over all of this at the same time by your daily choices. Next, Dr. Karen is going to discuss the benefits to the immune system of vitamin D and zinc. She'll show us how these nutrients can fit into the context of a whole food, plant-based diet centered around fresh fruits and vegetables.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Dr. Rick. Now, there's been a lot of talk about nutrition and immunity as of late, and as a result, I've spent quite a bit of time researching the diet and immunity connection and different nutrients that have been linked to immune system function. And I have to say, I've learned quite a bit. And in fact, I was thinking that I could share the basics of what I've learned in one webinar. But as it turns out, even the basics could really fill volumes. So as a result, this is the second webinar that we've created on this topic. Now, the replay of the first webinar, which is the Raw Food Immunity Connection Part 1, can be found on our website, rawfoodeducation.com. So after this webinar is over, if you haven't had the opportunity to see that one yet, I would encourage you to go to our website, rawfoodeducation.com, and watch it there. You can find it there. So this webinar is the Raw Food Immunity Connection Part 2. Now, one thing I'd like to mention that we talked about in webinar number 1 is a little bit here about vitamin C. Because vitamin C is important for a variety of different aspects of immune function, including the creation and activity of certain white blood cells. And maybe some of these you've heard of. Neutrophils, monocytes, T cells, B cells, NK cells. Essentially, vitamin C helps these immune system cells do their job better. Now, one thing I would like to mention in addition to this is that I sort of think of vitamin C when it comes to immune system function as being the great builder, because it's involved in so many building types of functions, like the creation of these important white blood cells. Another thing that it's very important for is the creation of collagen. So collagen is important for a lot of things in our body. It forms the basis for connective tissue and for the organs of our body and lots of other structures. So that's one of the reasons why I see vitamin C as the great builder. And I just wanted to make mention of that here because I'm going to talk about some other nutrients and what their characteristics are in relation to the immune system as well. Now for this webinar, I'm actually going to talk about vitamin D and zinc. Now, I see vitamin D as being the great modulator of the immune system, kind of similar to how I see vitamin C as being the great builder of the immune system. Now, when I say the great modulator, what does that actually mean? Essentially, vitamin D is important for keeping certain aspects of the immune system or immune response in check. We want our immune system to work well and appropriately, but we don't want it to overreact. Because when it overreacts, it can cause excess damage to our tissues. Now, it's really good that our immune system cells produce free radicals and other substances that fight off pathogens. But too many free radicals can create damage. And for those of you who watched the Raw Food Immunity Connection Part 1, we talked a little bit about what free radicals are. And what they are is they are molecules that have a missing electron, which makes them very reactive. So they're very good at, for example, killing pathogens. But since they're so reactive, they can create damage within our bodies as well. So we want enough of them to destroy pathogens, but we don't want too many of them that they're going to create damage to our body tissues. Now, vitamin D helps to keep the immune system from overreacting, specifically the activity of T cells and B cells. Now, in addition to modulating immune function, vitamin D also has some building functions, just like vitamin C does. It's involved in the production of certain immune system cells, like, for example, monocytes and macrophages, and maybe some of you have heard of those. It increases the production of anti-inflammatory factors and antimicrobial proteins that can directly kill pathogens. Now, vitamin D also has a lot of other important functions in the body. So having a reliable source is essential. So where do we get vitamin D? Now, we've all heard that we can get vitamin D from the sun. So how does this actually work? Now, up here on the slide, I've got a picture of the sun. And what happens here is that the sun releases ultraviolet B spectrum rays that interact with 7-dehydrocholesterol in our skin. And then we get the formation of cholecalciferol, which is also known as vitamin D3. And probably many of you have heard of this particular form of vitamin D. It's the form that is made by our skin through the interaction of the sun. So it's the human-produced form of vitamin D. Now, cholecalciferol, after it's formed in the skin, travels down to the liver where it's converted into 25-hydroxy vitamin D3, also known as 25-hydroxycholecalciferol. And the reason why I mention that here is because that's actually a popular test. So clinicians who are testing for vitamin D oftentimes will be testing for the 25-hydroxy form here, 25-hydroxycholecalciferol. And then after 25-hydroxycholecalciferol is formed in the liver, then it travels down to the kidney, where it is converted into the activated form of vitamin D that's also known as 125-dihydroxycholecalciferol or 125-dihydroxyvitamin D3. Now, I'm just mentioning this here because some of you might have heard of some of these different forms or are familiar with the chemistry behind vitamin D, and I just wanted to make mention of that for those of you who might be interested. Now, the ability to get adequate amounts of vitamin D from the sun has been questioned. So it's best to get a vitamin D test to check one's vitamin D level and determine with a qualified healthcare provider if a vitamin D supplement is necessary, and if so, how much. Now, next I'd like to talk a little bit about the supplemental forms of vitamin D, because I've noticed over the years that sometimes people like to learn more about them, and sometimes there might be some confusion about them as well. So before moving forward, though, I'd like to point out here that vitamin D is not just an issue for vegans and vegetarians and raw foodists. In fact, a 2018 study found that almost 40% of almost 5,000 participants were deficient in vitamin D, which is characterized, according to this study, as a blood level of less than or equal to 50 nanomoles per liter or 20 nanograms per milliliter. Now, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey in 2005 and 6 found that 42% of the almost 4,500 respondents were deficient in vitamin D, with deficiency rates of being up to 82% for some segments of the population. So, in other words, 40% of the population of the United States is not going to be vegan or vegetarian, or should I say are not vegan or vegetarian. So there's a lot more people out there who have this type of issue. It's not specific to plant-based or raw food diets. Now, in recent years, vitamin D has become one of the most discussed nutrients in the health community. It definitely has. And it's also one of the most complicated and controversial of the nutrients, especially when it comes to supplementation and plant-based diets. There are two supplemental forms of vitamin D, vitamin D2 and vitamin D3. Now, vitamin D2 is also known as ergocalciferol. Maybe some of you have heard that. Ergocalciferol has historically been thought of as the plant-based form of vitamin D. Now, on the other hand, vitamin D3, which is also known as cholecalciferol, as we talked about earlier, has historically been considered a non-plant-based form of vitamin D. To shed a little bit more light on this topic, vitamin D2 supplements have traditionally been made from certain mushrooms. Now, exposure of ergosterol in these mushrooms to ultraviolet B spectrum rays leads to the production of vitamin D2. Now, does this mean that if we eat edible mushrooms that we're going to get enough vitamin D? I would not count on it. I'm definitely skeptical. I think that the best way to know is to get a test. Now, conversely, vitamin D3 supplements have been made from lanolin found in sheep's wool. The exposure of 7-dehydrocholesterol in lanolin to ultraviolet B spectrum rays leads to the formation of vitamin D3, similar to how vitamin D3 is produced in our skin. Now, research is mixed on which particular form or which supplement is more reliably effective at raising our vitamin D levels. Much of this research has indicated that the D3 form of vitamin D is more effective at raising blood levels of vitamin D than vitamin D2. However, some research does indicate that the two can be equivalent. That's very interesting. Many people on plant-based diets have expressed concern to us about this since they have found that their vitamin D2 supplements are not giving them the results that they're seeking. Consequently, some have considered using a D3 supplement to raise their vitamin D to desired levels. Now, where does this leave someone who wants to stay true to their vegan lifestyle and ethics? Fortunately, in recent years, several supplement companies have formulated supplements with vitamin D3 sourced from lichen. Now, what is lichen? Lichen is an organism that's composed of some type of fungus and algae, or cyanobacteria in some cases, living together symbiotically. Now, lichen is often found growing on tree branches and rocks and can have a pale green to gray or mushroom color, as well as other different types of colors. Now, does this mean that we should go and eat lichen to get our vitamin D? And the answer to that is no. Many species of lichen are not edible, so it would be best to stick with a supplement. But the good news is that a vegan vitamin D3 supplement now does exist, and various supplement companies are offering it as an alternative to lanolin-sourced vitamin D. That's fantastic to know. Now, if one uses a supplement, it's important to educate oneself about the safety track record of the supplement companies that are being considered. It's really important to go with a company that has good quality control, because we don't want to be taking a supplement that has too much or too little vitamin D in it. Shifting gears here, next we're going to talk about zinc. Now, we've all likely heard that zinc is important for immune function. In fact, this group of researchers up here on the slide referred to it as a gatekeeper of immune function. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why these researchers might have said that coming up. Now, kind of along the same lines, I think of zinc as being the great communicator of immune function because of its involvement in communication within and in between immune system cells and other cells of our body. It's really important that we have communication between our immune system cells, because if there isn't communication going on there, then our immune system doesn't really know how to react to what's going on. Now, we talked about vitamin C as being the great builder, and vitamin D as being the great modulator. And zinc is essential for communication. So what does this all mean? First of all, zinc is involved in communication within our immune system cells, so within our individual immune system cells, so that they function properly on their own. And communication with those immune system cells and the rest of the body. Now, here's an example: cytokines. Now, cytokines are molecules involved in communication between immune system cells and immune system structures, and they help to coordinate an appropriate and balanced immune response. Now, for example, if an inflammatory process is going on in our body, such as when there's, for example, a pathogen present, zinc moves from our bloodstream into our organs, and when the inflammation is resolved, zinc will return to our bloodstream. Now, this movement is a signal to our immune system cells that something is going on. And this movement kind of puts the immune system on alert. Now, our immune system cells on their own can actually sequester zinc, so they can absorb zinc from our bloodstream. So by taking the zinc out of the bloodstream and then absorbing it, these immune system cells can keep microorganisms such as pathogens from being able to use it. Now, this process is similar to what we observed with iron, which we talked about in the Raw Food Immunity Connection Part 1. Now, pathogens like bacteria, for example, they need zinc and iron for growth and replication. So removing iron and zinc from the bloodstream keeps the pathogens from being able to use it. Zinc is also involved in immune system cell production and function. Some examples would be T cells and B cells, and these are important immune system cells. It's involved in the production of free radicals for the destruction of pathogens, and also the neutralization of those free radicals that are not used up in the destruction process. So here, zinc actually has a couple of functions. It is involved in the production of these free radicals, but also in the deactivation of them. Zinc is also needed for DNA transcription, which is necessary for the creation of new immune system cells. And there's lots of other things that zinc is important for as well. Now, what about in a situation of zinc deficiency? What happens to immune system function then? Now, zinc deficiency leads to a number of immune system challenges, including dysfunction or weakened activity of certain immune system cells. And examples would be neutrophils and NK cells. We also see decreased production of a type of immune system cell called T cells, and overall decreased immune responses. All of this can lead to an increase in bacterial, fungal, and viral infections. Now, because of this overall decrease in immune system cell activity and overall decrease in immune function, our body is going to try to find a way to compensate for this. And so what it does is it creates more inflammation. And one of the ways that it does that is it creates more pro-inflammatory cytokines. And in an effort to create inflammation, to try to take the place of the more specific immune responses that have been affected by zinc deficiency or lower zinc levels in our body, this can result in more damage to our own tissues through this inflammatory process. Because of this less specific immune response, the inflammation is going to be created to try to ward off these pathogens, and in the process, we're going to have greater tissue damage. So this is one of the many reasons why zinc is so important. We want enough zinc so that we can have more specific immune responses that are going to take care of the pathogen that is present with less damage to our own tissues. Now, let's take a look at some plant sources of zinc. Oftentimes, when people think of fruit, they don't necessarily think of fruit as being a good source of minerals. Now, years ago, I actually did some research on zinc and iron, and I found that fruit eaten in quantity can actually have a notable amount of zinc. Of course, it's not going to be as high as what we're going to see in vegetables and nuts and seeds, but I think it's important to make note of this. Oftentimes, fruit has a reputation as being low in minerals and being not very good sources of anything except for maybe vitamin C and antioxidants. So let's take a look at what we have up here. We've got watermelon, cantaloupe, avocado, peaches, blackberries, pomegranate, raspberries, apricots, blueberries, and strawberries. And I also have the daily values for zinc and iron over here on the right-hand portion of the slide. So let's take a look at those first. Now, the adult daily values for zinc here in the United States, 8 milligrams for women and 11 milligrams for men. And then the adult daily values for iron are 8 milligrams for men and postmenopausal women. And then for premenopausal women, it's 18 milligrams. So it's good to have these numbers for comparison as we're talking about these foods. Now, oftentimes when you look at fruits, for example, you see certain serving sizes. And those serving sizes might be appropriate for people who are not necessarily eating a whole food, plant-based, raw food diet. But if you actually look at the diets of many raw foodists, especially the high fruit eating raw foodists, we actually see serving sizes for these fruits as being quite a bit higher. So what I have up here is kind of the minimum of what I tend to see a lot of raw foodists eat. But then again, it really does depend on the person. But nonetheless, I wanted to show you these amounts here. And if you're somebody who eats more than these amounts up here, then you can adjust these numbers accordingly. Now, it's not unusual for me to see a raw foodist eating a small watermelon here. And that's defined in the nutrient analysis software that I was looking at as 3,200 grams. In order to know for sure how much that watermelon actually weighs, if you want to go ahead and weigh that yourself before you eat it, then you can get an idea if it's similar to this. Another thing I'd like to mention about watermelon up here, it has the zinc amount for that watermelon as being 3.2 milligrams. And I was wondering, because it didn't say in the nutrient analysis software, if this was taking into account the watermelon seeds. Now, watermelon is in the same family as pumpkin, and we know of pumpkin seeds as being a good source of zinc. So I wouldn't be surprised if this number here, 3.2 milligrams for that watermelon, is including some seeds. Now, for cantaloupe here, one medium cantaloupe, 0.99 milligrams of zinc. One avocado, 0.87 milligrams. Peaches, 3 medium, 0.77. Blackberries, 1 cup, 0.76. Pomegranate, raspberries, apricots, blueberries, strawberries. I would say just take a look at those on your own time. There will be a replay available, so you'll have the opportunity to take a look at these numbers again if you'd like. The iron content I've included up here because I think it's interesting to compare and to know. Oftentimes people talk about zinc and iron together, so that's one of the reasons why I have done this here, just for your own interest. Now, once again, I would like to say these numbers are not as strong as what we would see for certain leafy greens and for nuts and seeds, but nonetheless, I think it's important to note that fruit eaten in quantity can have a notable amount of zinc. Yeah, and the same is true for iron. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about some vegetables and sprouts. Now, oftentimes people think of lettuce as not being particularly high in nutrients, but you know what? Actually, if you eat it in quantity, it certainly can be a good source of certain nutrients. Now, when it comes to zinc here, 1 head of romaine lettuce, and that's defined as 626 grams, that's a large head. That's a large head. And for Dr. Rick and I, we usually have 1 head of lettuce of about this size every day. Some heads of lettuce are going to be smaller than that, so that's something to consider. As we can see here, 1 large head of romaine lettuce has 1.44 milligrams of zinc and 6.07 milligrams of iron. That's actually pretty good. And then if we move down here and take a look at some of the other vegetables we have here, we've got endive, also pronounced endive, cauliflower, broccoli, dandelion greens, bok choy. As you can see, we've got some zinc in these serving sizes, as you can see here. Some people eat more than these serving sizes. So if you're somebody who does that, I would suggest that you adjust the serving sizes accordingly. Now, there were a few things that I was actually surprised of. I'm a big fan of sprouted peas and sprouted lentils, so I included those in here. It's not unusual for me to eat 1 cup or more of these in a sitting. 1 cup of sprouted peas has 1.3 milligrams of zinc. 1 cup of sprouted lentils is 1.2 milligrams. That's actually pretty good. And then we've got some other sprouts down here. Mung beans and alfalfa sprouts as well. And then at the top, we've got 1 cup of green peas, and those are unsprouted. There are peas that you can eat, for example, fresh off the vine, like English peas. You can harvest those and then just crack them out of their shell and eat them as is. So for those, 1 cup, we've got 1.8 milligrams of zinc. That's pretty good. Now, what about other popular greens? Like, for example, spinach. There's a lot of people in the raw food community who like to eat spinach. And in fact, when I got started with my raw food journey 30 years ago, spinach was my favorite leafy green. And when I looked it up on the nutrient databases, I saw that it was actually pretty rich in zinc and iron. And here are the numbers right here. 3 cups of spinach, we've got almost 0.5 milligrams of zinc and 2.44 milligrams of iron. That's not bad. So I thought, because I saw these numbers, I thought, okay, well, spinach must be a pretty good source of zinc and iron. However, I came to learn about oxalate, also known as oxalic acid. Now, oxalate binds to calcium, iron, magnesium, and zinc, and can make these minerals less available to the body. Now, in part 1 of the Raw Food Immunity Connection, the webinar that we did last month, there were a few people who asked about oxalate, and so that's one of the reasons why I've included it in this webinar here. Now, oxalate can be found in certain leafy greens like spinach, Swiss chard beet greens, parsley, and purslane. These are leafy greens that are especially high in oxalate. There's a lot of foods that do contain oxalate. And up here on the screen, I have for you a table that shows the amount of oxalate in a variety of different foods. So parsley, chives, purslane, spinach, and beet greens, as we can see, they are all pretty high in oxalate. And so what that means is that iron and zinc, calcium and magnesium are not going to be especially available from these foods. Now, these are not bad foods. They're just not going to be a great source of those minerals that I mentioned, especially when they're raw. Now, it's hard to get away from oxalate. There are lots of foods that contain it, even things like romaine lettuce, broccoli, and celery, cauliflower, endive, things like tomatoes, summer squash, cucumbers, kale. There's all a little bit of oxalate in those foods. So what I suggest to people is to focus your diet on the lower oxalate foods. Now, one thing I'd like to mention here is that kale oftentimes gets the reputation as being high oxalate, but in fact it's not. It's actually one of the leafy greens that is the lowest in oxalate. So eating lower oxalate foods can help us get more iron, calcium, magnesium, and zinc. Now, here are some other sources of zinc and iron. And the reason why I have these here is because these are some of the most concentrated sources of zinc in the plant world. We've got hemp seeds, pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds, cashews, and then lower down we've got things like pecan, chia seeds, almonds, walnuts, and even Brazil nuts. And then at the bottom we have wild rice. And we'll talk about that in just a couple minutes here. Now, hemp seeds and pumpkin seeds and sesame seeds, those are all pretty well known as being good sources of zinc, as we can see up here on the screen. For hemp seeds, 2 tablespoons, we've got almost 2 milligrams of zinc. For pumpkin seeds, 2 tablespoons, almost 1.5 milligrams. Sesame seeds, almost 1.4 milligrams. That's pretty good. Cashews are also pretty good at 2 tablespoons for 1.09 milligrams. And then we have pecans, 2 tablespoons, almost 0.9 milligrams of zinc. It can be a challenge to find truly raw pecans. Chia seeds, 2 tablespoons, we've got 0.8 milligrams of zinc. Almonds, 2 tablespoons, 0.6 milligrams. Walnuts, 2 tablespoons, almost 0.6 milligrams. And then I have Brazil nuts up here. They're a great source of selenium. They're not super high in the other minerals. There's a little bit of zinc in there, and there's also a little bit of iron. Now, wild rice is pretty amazing when it comes to zinc content. We've got 1/2 cup uncooked at almost 5 milligrams of zinc, 4.77 milligrams. That's really impressive. Really, really impressive. You can make it cooked, of course, but you can also bloom it, which doesn't require cooking. In fact, I've made bloomed wild rice many times, and I would encourage you, if you're interested in this process, to do a web search and see and find some directions on how to make it, just for your own interest. We're not going to cover it here today, but I just wanted to make mention of that because there are raw foodists who do make it via this blooming process. And here's a picture of wild rice up here on the screen. And then next to it, we have a bloomed wild rice dish that I made here that contains some green onions, some avocado, and some tomato. And it was really delicious. And if we compare these numbers up here to the adult daily values for zinc, which once again is 8 milligrams for women and 11 milligrams for men, we see that hemp seeds, pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds, and wild rice are pretty rich in zinc. Next, I'd like to briefly mention phytic acid, or phytate, because people oftentimes ask questions about it. Now, phytate is similar in some ways to oxalate, and one of the ways that it's similar is that it binds to calcium, iron, magnesium, and zinc and makes them less available to the body. Now, phytate is found in a variety of plant foods, including grains, nuts and seeds, and other foods. And here's a list of those foods up here. Wild rice, Brazil nuts, sesame seeds, almonds, walnuts, azuki beans, cashews. We just mentioned a few of those on the last slide as being good zinc sources, but look at that amount of phytate in them. And then there are other foods listed below that have some phytate, but not as much as the ones that I listed up further. How do we address the phytate that is present in these foods that we talked about earlier as being good sources of zinc and iron? The way that we can do that is through soaking and sprouting, because soaking and sprouting activates an enzyme called phytase that is found in nuts and seeds and grains, including wild rice. And this enzyme breaks down phytate. Soaking can also decrease phytate through the leaching of phytate into the soak water. Now, when it comes to wild rice, you can't really sprout that. You can just soak it and bloom it. So soaking is going to help to decrease the amount of phytate that is present in wild rice and other foods as well. So here we have up on the screen some lentils. So soaking and sprouting lentils will help to decrease the amount of phytate in them. And then we've got some almonds. We soak those, and that will help to decrease the phytate in there as well. How long do I usually soak these foods? Oh, usually about 8 hours. And I know that for different foods, there are different soak times. Now, how much of a difference can soaking and sprouting make in phytate content? That's a really good question. Here was one study that was done on sorghum grain. And I know that this is just specific for sorghum, but it's a very good indicator. So if we look at the iron availability in raw, unsoaked sorghum grain, we see the percentage is about 8 to almost 14%. And then after soaking, we're at 14.6 up to almost 21%. And then germinated, also known as sprouted, the availability of that iron has gone up to 16.7 up to about 21 as well. So as you can see, soaking and sprouting can definitely make a difference in the iron availability.
In today's webinar, we presented just a tiny fraction of the information available to those of you who would like to continue your journey learning with us. Before we tell you more about how you can do that, we'd like you to consider the theme of our webinar series from this year and last year, which is Transcending What's Trending. Now, there's been a lot of talk lately, very justifiably, about our immune systems. But when this particular crisis that we're in now becomes less of an issue, having a strong immune system is still going to be extremely important. And because the same nutrients and the same healthy eating considerations apply to so many other systems of the body that all work together synergistically, these same considerations make sense to focus on for your best health and well-being across the board for a lifetime. We truly want all of you to be trend-proof. Why? Because for those of us who are motivated and willing to make meaningful dietary and lifestyle changes, misinformation is probably the single largest hurdle to the process of achieving excellent health. No matter what you eat, there's someone out there to tell you why it's bad for you. But when you're really well educated, you are much less susceptible to the misinformation throwing you off track. And with all that stuff coming at us today, it's more important than ever to be well educated. And as far as the misinformation goes, this issue is going to only continue to get worse over time. So we all need to know what to do, and we need to be confident in it so we keep building and experiencing our best health consistently. And when you have that level of education that leads to that level of confidence, you can truly achieve a lifetime of supercharged health. Our curriculum, Mastering Raw Food Nutrition, based on our 30 plus years of personal, clinical, research, teaching experience, is designed to do just that. It's a year long, and our next program begins on August 26th, 2020. Our typical student spends about 4 hours per week with the course material. So if you're one of those people out there who's willing to put in a few hours a week for an entire year and cover the financial commitment, which is a few $1,000s, you can dramatically increase your chances for success and very much enjoy the learning process. So I'll first tell you about the topics we cover in this course, and then I'll go into how it's actually delivered. So the topics, boy, this is going to take a few minutes just to read off the topics that we cover. There's a huge array of things we cover in this curriculum. Pretty much everything you need to know about plant-based and raw food nutrition. We start out by covering calorie density, such an important concept, and being absolutely fluent in that is critical to so much of the rest of understanding. So we start off with a bang. Dr. Karen covers the basics of nutrition to give an overview of things to come. Blood sugar regulation, one of my favorite topics. Raw food sources of nutrients, including calcium, vitamin D, vitamin B12. Essential fats, which tie into blood sugar so much. Acid-alkaline balance, cleansing and detoxification, and not just the old-time rhetoric, but up-to-date science about how all of this stuff works together. Where do you get your protein? Of course, we need to cover that. Essentials of human digestion. Enzymes. And by the way, you've got the pro-enzyme raw food rhetoric. You've got the anti-raw rhetoric. Oh, all enzymes just get destroyed by hydrochloric acid, so therefore it doesn't matter. And as it turns out, both of those points of view of rhetoric are quite incomplete. And the real truth is what Dr. Karen shares with you in this class based on being up on all the facts and putting it together. Longevity and youth extension. We get into some really cool science there about how you can apply these principles to maximize your quality and quantity of life. We cover health statistics, so you know what's causing trouble and how to avoid it. The history of raw and living foods. We cover the foundations of why different camps of raw foodists think the way they do and the history behind it. Dr. Karen looks at two approaches and the nutrient concerns there. Foundations of the raw food diet, food combining, raw food and weight loss. Classic studies in support of plant-based nutrition. We look at McDougall and Pritikin and the Framingham Heart Study and the China Study and Esselstyn and Ornish and all the classics there, and we lay the foundation for the importance of whole natural plant foods. We then go on to look at the additional benefits of more fresh fruits and vegetables in your diet. So for example, when you're not cooking food, you're avoiding various carcinogens that we mentioned briefly that can stress your immune system, for example. We go into more of the effects about heating on food from what happens to your food when you cook it from a nutrient perspective. And of course, we cover beta-carotene and lycopene very thoroughly. Organic versus non-organic, grains, plant families, making sense of food labels, psychological factors in health and healing, different perspectives on candida, DHA, xenoestrogens, and phytoestrogens. I cover a lot of case histories from my 4 years of clinical experience at True North in the juice and water fasting section. Dr. Karen covers a survey of superfoods and supplements in several sections where she distinguishes the marketing claims from the real science so you can make sense out of what is being said out there and know if it's really legit or not. Expanded raw food sources of nutrients, raw food exaggerations, the history of human food choices. Oh, there's competing thoughts out there. Was it meat that gave us a big brain? Was it starches? Was it fruit? She examines all of those very fairly and objectively so you have accurate information so you know what to do with. Big question of animal products, importance of sleep, menu planning for various health challenges. We've talked about the Healthy Foundation covers so many things across the board, but there are some nuances depending on the health challenge you're dealing with, and those are really important to know about. An expanded view of carbohydrates, raw food weight loss too. Dr. Karen looks at all the different sweeteners out there, and our bottom line is minimize or eliminate them, just eat fruits and vegetables, but if you want to make some of the fancier things, it's good to know what's going in there and what the best choices are. The importance of hydration, research in support of raw food nutrition. There's enough raw foodists out there in the world that researchers have studied them, and there's science behind it, and we can see what happens and make sense out of it. Nutrient analyses of various plant foods and then various sample diets. And we'll see even within raw food, there are some significant differences. And comparing raw food diets to whole food plant-based diets to standard American diets, it's very, very revealing. Then I've got 4 more hours on fatty acids, an advanced section where we look at omega-3 conversion and a whole bunch of case histories. We go on to an overview of energy where you look at all the mechanisms and what happens to fructose and fat and what are the metabolic pathways and how does that affect fat on our body. sea vegetables, probiotics and prebiotics, the pleasure trap, extraordinary information borrowed from Drs. Doug Lyle and Alan Goldhammer, the autonomic nervous system, overcoming challenges and pitfalls in raw food nutrition. That summarizes a lot of the other sections and adds additional information to make sure you are fluent in all of these principles so you never have to get thrown off track. Then in the last quarter of the class, we go into our educator material. So whether you are somebody who wants to go out and educate others about plant-based and raw food nutrition, or just be able to speak to friends and family and coworkers with authority and be a good influence on them instead of them being a bad influence on you, this section is so important to bring things together and to give you that confidence so you won't be thrown off track. And Dr. Karen has a section on searching for information in the scientific literature after this class is over, so you can continue how to handle questions, how to put events together, all that kind of stuff to make sure you are incredibly solid. And no matter what your goal is for yourself or to educate others or just for your friends and family, by the time our students complete this course, their level of understanding and confidence in a whole food plant-based diet with a foundation of raw fruits and vegetables is extremely high. We send surveys out and ask people how much they learned, and most people say my level has skyrocketed, even if they have an extensive background already. They really appreciate the thorough and unbiased perspective that we share. And the thing is, our position is all you have to do is tell the truth, and the benefits of plant-based and raw food nutrition are naturally revealed. No outrageous claims, nothing crazy, just amazing health-supporting results. Many of you know Chris Kendall from YouTube and other social media, from fruit festivals. If you've listened to any of our summits in the past 5 years, you have likely heard from him. Chris took our class last year, and here's what he said in responding to our survey. Drs. Rick and Karen are literal gold mines for an up-to-date, unbiased, raw food and vegan nutritional education. I already had a strong foundation in these subjects and enjoy researching myself. But the way the Mastering Raw Food Nutrition is laid out and the depth that goes into the current science, coupled by their combined 60 years of experience, is next level. I feel blessed to have taken this class and know anyone seeking success with a raw/vegan diet or teaching it will benefit more than expected. So we're so happy to have Chris join us. It was kind of fun to have a raw food celebrity in class with us. Tamar from Israel says, the Mastering Raw Food Nutrition course is the best course I have ever had. Also, being vegan for almost 12 years and eating mostly raw for 4 years, and all that time doing my best for educating myself about the natural hygiene philosophy and about vegan and raw food lifestyles, the course gave me a strong foundation into the science and the history of the plant-based movement that I was looking for to be sure that I'm doing the right thing for me and my family. Thank you so much. And in another comment, she said, thanking you for making such a profound, comprehensive, and professional course. Susan from Idaho said, though I've been a raw food enthusiast for over 10 years, I never knew what I never knew. Drs. Rick and Karen taught me some key principles that were missing from my understanding of raw food nutrition. I'm grateful for both of you, who you are, and how much you use your wisdom and knowledge to support others in their path to greater health and vitality. Thank you so much. And Jackie said, get ready to learn lots about nutrition that you never knew existed. So it is incredibly detailed, incredibly thorough, incredibly comprehensive, and we lay it out in a way that makes sense. So if you're already concerned, oh, these people know so much already, don't worry. Even if you're not science-based, we lay it out in a way that everybody can understand. In fact, if you've been following the information in this webinar, you'll be able to follow the course videos. So the primary way that we deliver the content is through professional quality videos, similar to what you're seeing here. There's approximately 2 hours per week of videos. We break those down into 20 to 30 minute segments, so you don't have to watch everything all at once. You can re-watch these or listen, because we have the audio-only versions, as many times as you want. And actually, we're using a new delivery system this year that once you sign back in, wherever you left off, it will bring you to that exact point, so you don't have to remember again. So if you're busy and you want to cover things in bits and pieces, that is available to you. Now, the thing is, each 2 hours took us probably hundreds of hours worth of research to put together, and it cuts through the nonsense. It just delivers what's most important very efficiently and very clearly. It makes an incredibly good use of your valuable time. Along with the videos comes comprehensive notebooks. We send you 4 separate notebooks. Here they come throughout the year. There's over 900 pages of notes with thousands of scientific references that we used to put this curriculum together. Now, these notebooks are designed to complement the videos. They're not just transcripts of what we said. They have bullet points and charts and graphs. And the thing is, when you have your notebooks open, when you're listening and watching to the videos, everything makes sense, and you don't have to try to write everything down as quickly as possible. You can really pay attention to the videos and see what's in the notes and let all that sink in, because everything, just about everything, is in the notes. Some students fill in a little bit more, and then in addition to complementing the videos, once the course is over, these notebooks are lifetime reference material. So here is one of them, if I can line that up with the camera. And just to show you a few samples here, there are some of the things, if I can line that up. You see there's bullet points, there's charts, there's graphs. It's really easy to follow along. And then when you go to look some things up after the class is over or during the class, just to review a little bit, it's all laid out for you. And it's taken a huge amount of effort to coordinate that and put those notes together, but our students find them so incredibly valuable. We also have video conferences on Tuesdays, 2 different times, 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Pacific time, which, depending on where you are in the world, usually covers most people. So that's where we get together in small groups and we answer questions and have discussion about the course content. So you get direct interaction with Dr. Karen and I regularly, several times per month. Now, what's nice about this is even if you can't make one of the meetings or one of the times just doesn't work for you, you can submit your questions in advance of the call. We will answer them during the call, and we actually record and save each call. So you can submit your questions in advance and then listen to the recordings afterwards. And so it's almost in real time, but it's still direct interaction with Dr. Karen and I. And our students, a lot of them just absolutely love coming on the conferences and being able to clarify things and let everything sink in from their answering their own questions, us answering their own questions, as well as hearing questions and answers from other students. Now, one of the things we're improving this year is we're adding video conferencing. To make a long story short, our previous method allowed you to submit questions in advance, and then we could upload our very high quality recordings to our system. It did not allow for video conferencing, whereas the video conferencing systems would not allow you to upload the high quality recordings and not allow you to submit questions in advance, only during the call. But now that we're updating our delivery system, we have the capability of getting questions in advance and uploading the calls. Therefore, we're going to be having video conferencing and get the best of everything. So you get to see us on the calls also, and we'll each have about half the screen, and we can share our screens also to show notes and other things. You won't just see a little thumbnail of us in the top corner. Okay, so for the past 4 years, we've had a Facebook group. And the Facebook group largely helps to support the conference call topics. So a student has a question, whether they ask directly with their voice or they submit the questions in advance, we will often post things in the Facebook group to support answering the questions, some research articles, some websites, whatever the case may be. Students also get to know each other in the group. They share recipes, talk about some different things, and there's a general sense of support. Now, we know that many people are legitimately concerned about privacy issues. So another positive change that we're making for this year's class coming up in August of 2020 is we're going to have a private study group in place of the Facebook group. So let's get Facebook on out of there, and we're going to have a private study group which replaces the Facebook feature, but it's part of the course. You don't have to go somewhere outside of the course, and you don't have to worry about your personal information being sold or shared or getting bombarded with things that you don't want to see. You can just focus on the course material, and that's one of the changes we're actually really, really happy about for this upcoming year in our effort to constantly strive for excellence and deliver this in a way that makes sense to you and sinks in so you can use it, so you can get all the benefits for a lifetime of extraordinary health, all designed to help you. One of our students from this last year, Monica from Canada, says that she is not a scientific person, never cared much about science. That's why she felt it's a real challenge for her. She said, Dr. Karen and Dr. Rick presented the course very well, so even I would actually understand. Their knowledge is so deep and very detail-oriented. They explained everything in the way everyone could understand, but at a professional level. I would recommend their course with love because I know their knowledge is so unique, and actually I feel lucky to have found them, and I was able to be a part of the 2018-19 class. Thank you for them to do all the research and nerdiness to be able to put together this beautiful course. She also said, keep up the excellent work. The world needs you, with a heart and a rainbow and a smiley sun there. So that's great. Now, another thing to consider here is that English is not Monica's first language, but she was still able to follow and understand everything between being able to watch the videos as many times as she wanted, hitting pause, going back, following along in the notebooks, and having the calls to be able to clarify everything. We have many students who English is not their first language. Pierre from Paris, France said, this course is just amazing. The work that has been done is just phenomenal. It covers everything around raw food and plant-based diets. We receive what science knows today about food. It clears every misunderstanding about food and nutrition. I use the course as a database for every video, article, and seminar I can attend. Now I feel able to do my own research and to analyze better every scientific content. Thank you. So out of this solid foundation, he is truly becoming trend-proof. He uses what he learned in our course as a reference point and as context to plug everything else he comes across into to help determine if it makes sense or if it doesn't. Another point about exposure versus cohesion. There are courses out there where you hear from lots of different people, and yes, they're all plant-based, but they don't all have the exact same perspective. So on the one hand, Dr. Karen and I have diverse backgrounds. She went to naturopathic medical school for 2.5 years, for example, and learned some things that I didn't. She also did a summer preceptorship at True North, but that was just for a summer, whereas I was there for 4 years. Because of our different backgrounds, we each bring different things to the curriculum, but because we're a married couple and we love this stuff and this is what we do full time, everything revolves around the same template, and we make sure everything's integrated and it all works together and it all makes sense. So we love this stuff. We both have doctorate degrees. Karen sort of has 1 2/3 doctorate degrees and 2 undergrad degrees. And all that, our personal clinical experience, all comes together and integrates as a whole. That's another thing that helps cut through confusion. Anita from Croatia said, "The course was great. It really is a good investment in health and in life in general. Doctors Karen and Rick really are the masters of raw food. They feel very energetic and passionate about every topic and thus easily spread the knowledge to students. All of the topics are of high importance and have the strong ability to change people's life." And Anita has a PhD. She actually teaches full-time. She's a professor and teaches at a university, so she's involved full-time in academia. So that testimonial coming from an actual professor really means a lot to us. And our student base ranges from people with advanced doctorate degrees to people like Monica who aren't that into science, and we go to great lengths to make sure everybody can understand the information because it is so extremely valuable and life-enhancing. So to summarize how this is delivered, we've got our 2 hours of professional video content per week. You can also listen to the audio-only versions if you'd like, a feature we just added this year. If you like listening to podcasts or other information on the way to work or when you're out walking or when you're exercising, you can access the videos but just the audio content, so you use a lot less mobile data. Also this year, we're adding interactive quizzes at the end of the content for each week, also to help enhance the learning process. We've got those thoughtfully designed notebooks for each subject that we mentioned to help follow along with the videos and for lifetime reference material. We have our near weekly video conferences. You can join us live, you can submit questions in advance, and you can listen to the recordings afterwards. And we have video conferencing this year with the ability to see us that we haven't had in the past. And then we also have our non-Facebook private study group, which takes the place of our previous Facebook group, but without the privacy concerns. Everything is fully private. All of this, again, is designed to make this make sense to you, so you're confident in it, so you implement it, so you can get all the benefits for a lifetime of supercharged health. Today we covered just a tiny bit of what is available in our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition curriculum, and there's so much more available for those of you willing to make the commitment to keep learning with us. Remember earlier when I showed you that photo of when I was overweight and having a bad allergy day? And based on the way I felt, I was really motivated to make some changes. I made the decision to change my course, and I am so glad that I did. Now it's time for you to make a decision. You're watching this webinar because you're interested in plant-based and raw food nutrition and taking your knowledge to the next level so you can supercharge your health and maintain it for a lifetime. At this point, you probably already have a good idea of if you'd like to continue your learning journey with us. Our next group program begins on August 26th of 2020, and it won't be offered again until late August of 2021. You can watch and listen to the course videos on your own schedule as many times as you'd like. This gives you plenty of time for the information to sink in. In addition to the comprehensive set of notes to help you follow along with the weekly videos and to be used as lifetime reference material, we have our near weekly video conferences in real time in small groups directly with us. Or as I mentioned, you could submit your questions in advance and listen to the recordings. The private study group is also there to support the learning process. We love connecting with our students and will be there with you the whole way for the entire 12 months. You can access the course anywhere you have an internet connection, which is most places on the planet. We'll be sending you an email shortly where we'll invite those of you who are really excited about the course to speak with us to answer any questions you have about the curriculum and the structure of the class to help determine if it's a good fit for you. You can also click on the schedule link that's on your screen right now. We look forward to speaking with you about your health goals and about how mastering raw food nutrition can help you achieve them. We're now going to take a 5-minute intermission. We'll be back in a few minutes to answer your questions, and in the meantime, please feel free to sign up for a time to speak with us.